computer. All right, thank you. Anyone like to share a moment that came to mind as you closed your eyes for those few seconds? Jessica, yeah, I didn't see you over there. Of course, go ahead.
The moment that I had, I don't know if this had to be a real moment, but the moment that I imagined was like people huddled in a group, like talking excitedly and being like, I don't know, like that collective effervescence, like we're all doing the same thing together, we're building something. That's sort of the moment that I had, and that we're all completely present in the thing that we're doing.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's what I saw also. It was noisy in mine, and a lot of people were talking without reservation. Anyone else?
Hi, Barbara. I'm Jenny.
Hi, Jenny.
I think that what came to mind was I was a RJ trainer for 5 years, restorative justice trainer outside of the university, and a lot of the moments that conjure up for me were the moments where we did circle and storytelling, and really thought about how did that make sense with the vision that we wanted to build. And I did RJ in schools, or I was doing harm circles. And so it was always like connected to the larger vision, but it was rooted in our individual storytelling and examples that came from our own livelihoods and our relatives. And so I thought that was, yeah, it was nice to remember that, and I really trying hard to bring that into the classroom setting. But yeah, that was my moments of joys around teaching and sharing knowledge.
Thank you. That was also beautiful. Kirsten?
So the moments I was thinking of was actually my time spent in 4-H as a youth, which is sort of an after-school program. And when I think about it, it was very hands-on learning. It was very non-hierarchical because it's clubs of kids who are all different ages. So you would learn from people older than you and people younger than you. And it was, it was non-graded, right? It's how do you learn to handle chickens? How do you learn to do things better over time? And I think that the fact that it was very a hands-on experience is interesting, because I think we often invest really heavily in sort of the life of the mind and thinking, and what does it look like when learning is embodied?
Thank you. Also beautiful. Anyone else? Stephanie.
What came to mind was I used to do theater. So I would think about all these different theater communities that I would engage with and be a part of. And on the first day, we don't know each other. But then, of course, being in theater, we do a lot of, breathing and warm up exercise with the voice, with the body. And we're all literally like growling and screaming and stretching our facial expressions at each other. And it's hilarious. And yet we're there, we're present, and we're with each other. No one's judging anyone. We're enjoying each other's presence. We're egging each other on to like do more, or to stretch further, or to be louder, or project higher. And really, this engagement is just fun, right? There's no questioning. There's no second guessing ourselves or being nervous and, being such extroverts in a theater group. We're all just out there, putting ourselves out there, no matter how emotional and vulnerable the space or what we bring to the space can be. And yet we're all just supporting each other in so many ways.
That was also beautiful. Marilyn.
So I'm not sure if it will go through because my internet is rather unstable. But if I stop at any point, apologies. Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, fantastic. So I think for me, last year in 2020 during the pandemic, I attended a webinar, and it was by Jammy Sisterhood, and it was a space that I had actually never been in before, in the sense that it was predominantly Black women, and it was an academic seminar, but everyone was extremely supportive of each other. Everyone was fully themselves. There was no self-censoring. And as Barbara mentioned very early, it was it was loud. If you weren't, it might have seemed loud to other people. It wasn't loud for me. It was very much like being with family. And it was an academic situation, but I felt completely at home and everyone was very supportive of each other, always sort of hyping each other up. And it was just the most inclusive space that I've ever been in before. And that's what I was thinking about.
That's also beautiful. Anyone else? So in listening to the comments that were made, or the stories that were shared, some words stood out to me. And if words stood out to you, maybe you can also share them. But the one that stands out to me most is that there's movement, there's emotional content, there's joy, it's fun, there's stretching, there's people pushing each other in a safe space, right? Being vulnerable. There's this kind of hands-on component. We are driven by a growth mindset, right? We're not concerned with what we look like or what people think of us. And so there's a non-judgmental aspect. It's very embodied. There's something about stories, whether we tell them through our physicality or tell them with our voices. We are acknowledged as living human beings. We are fully present. We are silly. We are noisy and loud. That's so beautiful and so different, like Marilyn said, than we think of when we think of education as like, and collective, right? This is a collective activity rather than a singular activity of silence and contemplation. Anyone else have any things that stood out in listening to what folks shared about this kind of inclusive space? So the question, if not, the question for me is, how do we as educators reproduce that and create that? We know what it's like when we feel heard and seen, when we feel valued, and when we enter a space and leave that space transformed in some way, which often has to do with our connection to other people. Then I guess the question that I ask myself all the time, and the question I'm going to pose for you all is, as beneficiaries and recipients of those kinds of spaces, how can we as educators, what can we be doing in our classroom as educators to make those things come alive for our students in a way that is not an add-on, that isn't an outside activity that's separate from the learning experience, that doesn't, I think sometimes when I talk about like the things I do in the classroom, some people say, well, it's not very rigorous, or it's not, it takes away from the content. How can we conjoin all of those things, the rigor, the content, the fun, the passion, so that all folks feel that they are valued and have something to contribute? And I think this question is super important for us at the Claremont Colleges because we are predominantly white institutions and predominantly upper class institutions, right? So that's my overarching question that I would like to just lay out there. And I have this rubric. Does anyone hate rubrics? Jenny, yes, Jenny. I don't know how helpful this is going to be for you, but I have. So I want to preface. I want to preface what we're going to be doing in a couple of ways. So I love rubrics because I use them as, they're not an assessment or an evaluation, but they are something that I use to guide myself. They're like a series of questions that I just want to see, how am I doing on these things? So we're going to use a rubric as a guide for self-reflection and decision-making, but not as a deficit, like you didn't make the mark, like you're not highly developed on this one, you're failing, not like that kind of use, but like, and that is where the layered approach comes in. So all of us are definitely, everybody has strengths and everybody has areas or aspirations where we'd like to develop further. So the good thing about the rubric is it helps, it encourages us to have like a developmental mindset. Like maybe right here at this point, so there's 3 areas for this rubric. I can actually show it to you real quick. Let me do share screen. Here it is. Can you see it? Is that working? Yeah, is that good?
You make it, there you go, making it a little bit
make it
bigger.
bigger.
Is that better? Let me see if I can.
Maybe on my screen a tiny bit smaller so I can see the edge of the page. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, good. All right, thank you. So this is a rubric where there are 3 parts. So it's a rubric for not assessing. It's a rubric for encouraging self-reflection about our syllabi, because the syllabus tells students, what's happening, right? And it's also the guide for us, like across the semester, what are we doing? I feel like it's still too big, so maybe I'll make it a little bit smaller. Okay, so there's 3 parts to this rubric. One of them is the opening or upfront part of your syllabus, and I colored that part in gray. And this is not my rubric. This is a rubric created by Nancy Ayers, who is a colleague in the Joy Collective, which is an online community that Jessica Kaiser, who's here, introduced me to. So Nancy Ayers is an educator at the University of Rochester, and she created this rubric and she gives these trainings. So the 3 parts are the opening part of your syllabus, statements of commitment, your learning objectives, and then there are these different areas. So one would be like maybe it's an initial phase, and then 5 is like you've actually put a lot of work into this, right? And then there's a little spot for self-reflection. The second part for the rubric is your course readings, right? And it has a range of questions that you can ask yourself to see like where are you exactly in this range of like anti-racist, anti-oppression, inclusive, equitable teaching and learning spaces. And then the last part, and the course readings has an extra part where you can do some additional self-reflection. And then the last part in green is the assignments also. And there's a range of places that you'll be. So
There's a lot of chat in the chat of if we could get the link to the rubric.
Oh yes, that was the one thing I forgot to do. I was going to give that to you all and I forgot to do it. So thank you. Here it is. Oh no, shoot. That's my Zoom link. 1 second. Share. Nope, not that one. Where did it go? Sorry, I need a second. Nope, still didn't work. Sorry. All right, here it is. All right, those are the 3 areas, right? So I thought what I thought we could do is if we could get into breakout rooms, right? So maybe some folks are interested in thinking about how they can make their readings more in line with anti-oppression and anti-racist pedagogies. Maybe we could also have a group for those who are interested in talking about assignments. And then a third group would be those who are interested in talking about the upfront part of the syllabus. But before we do that, I wanted to just give a little bit about what is anti-oppression and anti-racist pedagogies, right? A curriculum like that. So I have a couple of stories that I'd like to tell you based on my own experience. One semester, I worked really hard on putting race at the center of my teaching, race in class. And I had all of these readings, and I had readings that were by women of color, transgender folks. I had readings that were explicitly about privilege and whiteness. But at the end of the semester, I felt like, and actually I got these comments on my course evaluations, that the white cisgender males in my class didn't engage with that. And I had to reevaluate what it was that I was doing. Also in that class, I had a woman, African-American student, who said to me that the final assignment was stereotyping Black folks. And I appreciated both of those comments because in my classroom, I have all kinds of students. And it forced me to reevaluate what it was that I was doing. And that's actually when I met Nancy. I told her these stories and she said, I'll sit down with you and we can go over all of this stuff together. The other story I'd like to tell you is that I was on a committee that gave funding to faculty to incorporate race and racial justice issues in their classrooms, in their teaching. And we asked a couple of people who got that money, a couple of faculty members, to come back and share what they'd done. How had they transformed their classes? And one faculty member said, well, I added some statistics and data about race. I disaggregated some certain kinds of outcomes that we were looking in society, economic outcomes in society, by class and race. And I realized that's also not anti-racist, and that's definitely not anti-oppression, right? It's talking about, and it was reflected back on me in the criticisms that I got from students, that what I was doing in the classroom, and perhaps what this other faculty member was doing in the classroom, I don't know because I didn't talk to them about it, but I could talk to my own experience, was I was reifying categories rather than talking about and explicitly dismantling hierarchies of race and gender and ability. And in some ways, I was not giving my students that joy that we've talked about. I wasn't giving them that joy and that inclusivity. What I was doing was separating who we are from what we're studying. And anti-oppression pedagogies are about how do we create spaces for our students that are not only inclusive, but that resist inherited paradigms and understandings of whiteness and what's good and what's bad and what's smart and what's less smart. How do we create spaces where in a predominantly white institution, those who have comfort are made to be are made to recognize that they need to have discomfort? And what is my role in all of those things, and in creating a space where students who don't feel like they belong there do belong in my classroom? So there's a decentered aspect, and there's a challenging race and challenging all kinds of oppressions that are reproduced in our society, because education is just another institution where those kinds of oppressions are reproduced. So being conscious of them, that to me is the center of creating that joy and that excitement and that way for students to feel that they can stretch themselves and stretch each other without pretending like these hierarchies don't exist. Does that make sense? So I'm not an expert and I don't have like a reading list. I just have the things that I've tried to do. And we all are experts based on our own lived experience. And we also know what it's like to have joy, and we know what we're good at and what we need to celebrate as educators. And we also know, if we think of our teaching as like in the rubric mindset, it's like there's a trajectory of who we are and what we do. And in some areas we're excelling. We know our students are pulled in. We feel that vibrancy. And then in other areas, we would like to move ourselves a little bit further along to make that vibrancy and that thriving and that beauty come alive in more ways. And that's how I'd like for us to use the rubric. And I talked too much. And what time we have until what time, Sarah? So 2:15? Is it 2:15? So we have or 2:30. Is it 90 minutes or? I think, I can't remember. But anyway, maybe Sarah, you could look for me and confirm.
Yeah, sorry, I'm looking right now. I also got caught up in thinking about this.
So Sarah, you look and I'll ask you all, is it helpful for us to get into 2:30? Oh, excellent. Woohoo. All right, good. All right. So thank you, Stephanie. Is it helpful for us then to get into groups according to this rubric and what we want to and we can talk in groups about what we want and give each other ideas. Or since we're a small group, do you want to just stay here together? And we can go through, do folks just want to talk about the upfront part? Do we want to share ideas about how we create the messages and the signal and the climate that shows that this classroom is an anti-oppression, anti-racist space? Do we want to do the readings? Do we want to work on assignments? And then there's some things in the chat. Let's stay as one group. Okay, all right. Is there an area that folks, if we look at that rubric, do we want to, yeah, we can brainstorm together, of course. Is there an area of that rubric when we look at it that stands out to us most, and that we can share with each other our experiences in creating that joy? That you know what I forgot to say? It's not just, shoot, how do I get out of there? It's not just joy. Let's call it disruptive joy. Yeah, it's a kind of disruptive joy that says this classroom space is not going to be reifying all of those traumatic, right, kinds of ways of being. Transgressive, yes, transgressive. So if we look, I guess, again at the rubric, are there spaces that we would like to start with our transgression? Do you want to start with the upfront part and just stick with that because we don't have a lot of time? Like, we can't do everything. Okay, Joanna is most interested in the upfront or the assignments. Okay, so do most folks feel like you're good with the readings, having readings that are voices that are not just white men? What do they say? Dead white men. We're all feeling pretty good about that like we're good with the readings part. Okay, so why don't we talk a little bit about the upfront part? So let's look. Okay, Jessica's also interested in that part. So let's go back to the rubric real quick. And also I recognize that no rubric is perfect. And this is not like, there might be things that we don't like about this rubric, but just thinking about it. So Nancy has a few things. A statement of commitment to diversity, anti-racism, inclusive classroom culture that welcomes difficult discussion, embraces the discomfort rather than the safe space, and then classroom norms of respect. And then engagement and discussion around racism and anti-racism and what will protect the emotional and psychological burden and labor of students of color and minoritized students in the classroom. So there's the rubric goes, as most rubrics do, from like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing. And then yes, Joanna.
Yeah, one of the questions I have looking at this that I'd love to hear people's thoughts on is in a class that's not explicitly about race or about social justice, but in which you absolutely include that as part of a broader set of contents. For example, I teach Introduction to Environmental Analysis, or Introduction to Environmental Studies, where we talk about environmental justice. We do a lot of deconstructing of environmental narratives that have set up hierarchies and that have privileged white male voices in particular. But this is also combined with talking about ecology, talking about all these issues that are not explicitly about race. So I very much want to set up this inclusive classroom space, and I think it's something that I could do a better job of. But one of my questions is how to balance all of these aspects of the rubric when that's not when the focus of the class is not primarily about anti-racism or primarily about social justice.
That's a great opening question. So you might have seen at the beginning, at the upfront part of the rubric, it says that even if classes aren't about race, they still are either anti-racist or they're not anti-racist. Yeah. So thanks, Joanna. Anyone want to give some comments or suggestions for Joanna? A class on environmental analysis that's not necessarily explicitly about race or social justice. Jessica.
I guess I have a question about your class because I am, what's it called? Maybe I'm biased, but I always think like everything is related to race. And so I was wondering, like, in what ways do you see connections to race and the content of your class? Because I don't know anything about environmental analysis, so I was wondering maybe studying from there might be helpful.
Yeah, and I mean, so part of the challenge with this class is that I need to cover a vast amount of material with it being an intro class. So, I have a unit that is explicitly focused on the intersections of race and class with, environmental privilege, because very much, who suffers disproportionate burdens on, for example, health, exposure to pollution, that is very much tied into race and class. So I have one unit that is really focused on that. And then I have places in other units where, we think about gender, where we think about queer perspectives, where we think about, again, challenging some of the traditional environmental narratives. So it's not like I limit it to just that one unit, which obviously would be problematic. But I also need to talk about, environmental science. I need to talk about all these other things which are, less directly connected. So I don't feel like, I don't know, and I already have like an 8-page upfront section on my syllabus. So, I don't want to, I have concerns about devoting a ton of space to, really emphasizing an anti-racist framework, although I can also see, value in that. So yeah, that's why I asked the question.
May I just, so we've got folks who you want to add, Marilyn and Jenny, you want to answer this one? Is that why your hands are up? Yeah, to respond to this question. I just wanted to add in the chat that it says from Alexander, how do you avoid essentialist conceptions of race in addition to making race integral to your learning, teaching and learning spaces and your approach? Marilyn?
Very quickly, I think that maybe I misunderstood what you were saying up front, Barbara, about what we're trying to do. But I think that, like I've taught intro to sociology, it's broad, and generally people think it's, obviously sociologists talk about race. Actually, sociologists love to not talk about race, but that's a different thing. But in my syllabus up front, I do center race, and I do center and make a commitment to respect and to also make sure that different voices are heard in the classroom. And I think that is regardless of what your subject matter is, I think that has to be front and center. And so I guess my question or my response would be that even though your class isn't about race and your class isn't about whiteness, but acknowledging and committing to creating a classroom that that decenters whiteness doesn't, I mean, in my opinion, at least for me, it doesn't matter that if it's a STEM class or not, and it's a humanities class or a natural science course. So, and as for environmental analysis, there's a lot about race and whiteness in there. But I think having a commitment I wouldn't say takes away from the fact that you're teaching about other things, but maybe I misunderstood what we were talking about in terms of the syllabus. If we're talking about the front part, at least in mine, it's a commitment to creating a certain classroom, right? And a space where all students can succeed. But I don't know, Barbara, if that's what we're talking about, or if we're, because I figured it was for everyone. It didn't matter what you were teaching, right? Okay.
Yeah, great points. Jenny, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I wanted to just commemorate, I don't know if that's the right word, with Joanna. Like, I think I'm a new faculty who is having to teach like psychology, statistics, and intro to psych. And for me, I'm not I don't think it's a struggle is about whether I have as a value and a practice of doing anti-oppression work. It's more having to reject, like teach things that I actually myself don't believe in entirely, but that the field and the expectation is that it's a required area or a set of readings or framework that we need to pass down for these folks these students to be able to successfully then be able to do well in their other classes. And so I think that's where I took your question, Joanna, as, and so just want to say, for me, it has been very difficult to continue to find the practice. I can have a commitment on the syllabus for sure. And I do have a practice where I do community building with my students and accountability partnership with my students, no matter what the class is. It's part of my RJ background. But when I'm teaching a week on Freud, because Freud is a thing that we need to learn, it's very hard to then also teach Freud, for instance, and do the critical analysis of Freud. It gets very hard, or teaching stats. Like I can bring articles about how statistics have been oppressive, but I'm also responsible with them learning how to do statistics as mainly being done by white supremacy projects, right? So there is a way, but I just want to say that for me, it has been very hard to find my voice in this because I don't believe in what I'm teaching a lot. These people that I have to teach, I don't believe in them, but I have to teach them because there has been already pushback. So I'm there, but I think I want to just add to the soup of conversation. As a woman of color teaching in a mostly white institution, I want to engage with whoever identifies here with other different identities that are not white and middle class. Maybe we can talk through what does it mean to present an anti-racist framework, either in our syllabus, in our practice, in our way of being, as people who are also embodying these identities that we're trying to, what are some, I know what the risks are. I've been in them. I know the receiving end of them. I'm looking for more of strategies of dealing with the white supremacy of students. I don't know how to say, dealing with students who in their learning are also harming us as professors of color or queer professors or professors with ability or whatever the experience has been that's different than the norm. So just wanted to add that if that's relevant or if anybody's interested in speaking on that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Jenny. So there's a lot of things in there. And like I said, I'm not the expert. I can only speak from my own experience. So what I want to say, Joanna, thank you for raising that question. Also, Alexander, right? So is there a way, I'm going to answer with a question. Is there a way where in our teaching, we don't have a unit on race and a unit on gender or a unit on disability or white privilege? Is there a way for us to have those things threaded throughout so that every topic has some component in it? And also to be have grace with ourselves that in one semester, we cannot cover every single thing and students cannot learn the entire body of complexity. So I think one thing that the rubric is helping me think about is like, what's my most important goal? What is the one thing, if I could change in my class to make it a space where I acknowledge that we live in a settler society that is based in whiteness, and I want my classroom to be a space that challenges that? Is there a practice that I could do every day and give gratitude to those who created that practice? For example, healing circles, where did they come from and why do we do them? Listening circles or check-ins. And then talk about how those kinds of things are actually radical resistance to this hierarchy of, I'm the professor, I have the education, I'm going to give you the knowledge, you're the students, you just sit there. And then some students are smarter and know more than other students. Some students have cultural capital and others have less, right? How can I create the spaces where those assumptions I actively, with joy and noise, and passion resist those things? And how can I signal them in my syllabus? So I teach organizational studies. So I don't do a section on race and organizations or gender and organizations. Now for every week I have writings by people of color about that topic. And I have debates. Sometimes I'll have, like, for example, Jenny, like a Freud and then a response to Freud in together, right? That would be like a woman's response, a transgender person's response, or a person of color's response to Freud. And that's how I try to incorporate those things throughout. And then about the upfront part, maybe we could talk just a little bit more about that. Jessica, your hand is up. Are there other comments?
I had a question because I would put in the past, I did something new last semester where I realized I would write these statements, but students didn't know why I was writing it because they didn't know who I was. And so I did this thing last semester, I'm going to do it again. It's where, like, I told them who I was and what my values were, and then how those values influence what I do in my work in the classroom. And then I talked about, like, my philosophy for the class, because I realized I was just like, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And then maybe people were like, well, why are we doing that? Or like, why does she care about that? And so I did it for the first time, and it was very scary because it was like, this is who I am, this is what, and I was just like, this feels very uncomfortable. But it did make it was more smooth connection to what we were doing. And I want to do that again, but I think the downside of that is that I take that language out of the syllabus because I'm talking about it at the beginning, and then I'll add it back later. But I don't know what your thoughts about, like, not having it at the beginning and then putting it back in, or sort of what your thoughts were about that.
How about we move in that direction? That's a great one, Jessica. Sarah?
Yeah, I think the syllabus sort of is like this stand-in or synecdoche for like the beginning of class, but it's not the only way we talk to or convey information to our students. And in fact, it shouldn't be, right? Like, if we just put a statement on the syllabus, that's not quite enough to like convey our values and to embed that stuff through. So like you can put, so I think like sharing verbally and then circling back to it at several points of the classroom is the way to go. Or at the CTL, we've talked about using the syllabus as a living document. Like, it's not something you should just have on the first day of class. We need to like refer back to it at several points in the semester. So I think you're kind of heading in the right track, where values are something that don't necessarily need to be on the syllabus, but they need to be conveyed. And the syllabus is one important way that we convey information, among many others.
This is reminding me a little bit about what Jenny said, how I have to teach these things, but I don't want to teach these things necessarily, right? So I think also maybe, and I know it's different for different people. So now I have tenure, and that puts me in a different spot than I was before I had tenure. But like this transparency, I think all of us seem to be connecting to this idea of transparency, and that we are the curators of our courses. We chose them. We know that for students to move to the next level, they need to know certain things or need to know about certain things. But we also have our values as to what it is. So sometimes I feel like, especially in the pandemic, I've just let go of a little bit. I've just said, like, we can't cover as I physically and mentally cannot cover all the things that I used to put and all the readings and all those things. So then I try to boil it down to the essence. So in this course, the course goals are this, and these are the materials that we must cover in intro to sociology or whatever. What are sort of the bare bones of those things? And then how can I embed anti-oppression in the readings and in the way that we engage with the readings throughout the class? So that kind of, I don't know, like the stem or the core or the tree root might be this particular kind of reading that, or this particular subject, but how can I augment it with like the leaves or the flowers or other things that go beyond that thing, that are true to my values? And then the only other thing I guess I wanted to add is what I started doing, if this is helpful, is first class, I have the students, I talk about my values. I have the students say, what do they want to get out of the class? And they write it down. And we have a shared Google Doc, and they don't put their name on it. It's just like, I just make a table, you know, with boxes, and they put in what they want to get out of the class. And I go through that, but I make mine first. I state mine first, you know, that I acknowledge that we are teaching at and learning at a predominantly white institution. And for me as a particular kind of person with a particular kind of lived experience, I want to joyfully dismantle those things and make a space where all people's where there's greater representation of voices and greater accountability for all of us to create a community where people feel brave to say things that are difficult and to challenge. So I say something like that, and then I have students say theirs. And then the other thing I started doing was I have, you know, I read a lot of, you know, bell hooks or other kinds of whatever I'm reading that's currently speaking to me. I actually have the students read it too. And we discussed that at the beginning of the class. Because even if it's not about the content, I think we are the content, right? We as a community are the content. And so I give them a little reading, and then we talk about it, and I refer back to it like throughout the semester, like Jenny and Jessica Sarah and Jessica were saying, right? To keep reminding people of why are we doing these things and giving us practice in them. I hope that helps.
Can I reflect something I heard you say, Barbara, which is like, and maybe you didn't say this, but I felt like you did say this, but that there's like the content, but then there's like the thinking about the content. There's a content, but then there's like our conversation about what that content is in relationship to it, and being transparent and like sharing with students, like, yeah, we're learning about whatever, Freud or whoever, but like, here's what I actually think about Freud, or here's what other people think about Freud, and this is how it relates to other things. So it's like doing both at the same time, but by being reflective, but also sharing those and being vulnerable and sharing that reflection to the students in our community throughout the semester. That's what I was kind of hearing you from you and from others.
Marilyn.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, what Joanna and Jenny were saying too, though. You know, in the intro classes, in the sort of the courses where students are learning the basics of the field, there's so much that you have to cover in terms of, you know, sub fields of the discipline, and you're trying to cover all of it. And a lot of the times you're feeling like, I can't get to some things that I think are super important. And then on top of that, you feel like, okay, I do have to make this also, you know, an anti-oppression, anti-white sort of like white supremacy curriculum. And it gets really, really difficult. And I just want to say that what Barbara said about thinking about what is the most important things that a student of, let's say, org or Soj or EA has to know, like the very basics, the fundamentals, and then trying to embed this sort of approach to understanding the world into it. And that can be a challenge. And I think that, you know, what at least I found to be useful and helpful is to have folks who can help, or at least sort of like do this sort of community project of coming up with ways in which to do this. And I know that for me, sometimes it's really difficult, and I need to get help from other people. And thinking about, you know, the mistakes, for example, I've made in like intro, where I do the typical, one section is on race, one section is on inequality, one section is on this. And of course,
I think breaking up a little bit, Marilyn. Marilyn, can you hear us?
And thinking about ways in which to put it in, but we need help. I think a lot of folks need help. I mean, I've needed help. So So I guess part of my question in all of this is like, how do faculty members get that kind of help and that kind of support? Can we create like a working group or support group of some way, you know, because we have a lot of work, extra work that we do. But how do we support each other? And that's very important, I think.
That is such a wonderful point. So plug for the CTL, it's not just in the January tune-up. We have office hours, open office hours. You can come. They're posted, yes, Sarah, on the website when our office hours are?
Yeah, that's right. But basically, we have someone available to you Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. I think there's someone who has an open Zoom link from 10 to 3 on those days, and you can also set up individual appointments. If anyone is interested, maybe in like creating a faculty of color support group, we can help fund a faculty learning community for people who have a shared interest that want to meet. We have course activity grants if you want to do a specific thing in your class and it would help to have some dollars to do that. We can do that.
Yeah.
Lots of stuff. I'll put our website in here and you can peruse and always email us if there's anything we can help with.
Yes, and like for me, for example, if anyone wanted me to look at your syllabus and I could share my syllabus with you, we could look at them together. Sometimes it's good to have an outsider, and then you explain like why are these things important, and then for an outsider to say like, oh, from my lived experience or from my perspective, I think you could add something here or there or here. We could do that together. I would love to do that. For example, Joanna, if that's something that you would like to do, I would love to sit down and look at your syllabus just together. And of course, again, no judgment and no like, you didn't do this right. It's just like, how could we insert some things that are in a way that is true to your learning objectives, true to who you are as an educator and what you want from your students, that also is I call this like a layered approach, because if we make one small shift, we don't know the impacts that it could have. So, and then once we are comfortable with that one shift, then maybe the next semester we'll try another little step and we'll try a different thing. And then it's that iterative process of just figuring out what we can add and what we're comfortable with and how we can push ourselves just a little bit, just like we ask of our students, right? And then the other thing I was thinking about is, the upfront part, the commitment, like your values and what you want students to learn in this class and how it is an anti-racist class can also be about, and we were talking about this already, but I just want to highlight it more explicitly for myself, is how we are in the classroom also matters, how students engage with each other and how noticing, there was a couple of earlier panels. Thank you, Jeremy. So there are a couple of panels about thinking about that climate in the classroom and who's speaking and who's quiet and how do we let people express themselves in multimodal ways, right? That are not just about like, I raised my hand, I made my contribution. So I'm going to say one thing real quick. I also sometimes teach in political science. Are there any political scientists here? Okay, so political science is a very masculine field and very a white field and very, and some of the students learn that way of being like, here's what I say, and then I don't care what anybody else says, and I'm just gonna start typing back on my laptop and read the news while other people talk because I don't care about them. Like, I think that so what I've done to balance again, to counter that is, as part of my anti-racist, anti-oppression pedagogy, I say we don't get graded on participation. You get graded on your contribution. And then you tell me, what's your contribution going to be this semester? What is your strength? I'm great at talking. Are you great at listening? Well, then add that to your list of contributions that you're going to listen more. Do you praise others? I didn't know I should. Well, then you add to your contribution that I'm going to acknowledge something that someone else said before I talk, or different things like that I think are also the process of creating a space that is joyful and acknowledging each other and decentering authority, which I think is also about anti-oppression pedagogy, is also about decentering, expanding who has the right to speak in the classroom and whose perspectives are valued. So perhaps then if we go back to the example of the environmental analysis, that, you know, like folks of color, of course, are the recipients of bad environmental policies, but they're also activists in fighting for their communities. They're also scholars who are writing about and asking questions that other people don't ask. And I do think those things can be peppered throughout the semester, and they don't have to necessarily be about one unit. This rubric helped me see that that's what I had been doing. I had been distinctly saying, okay, here's this, and then the response is this, or, you know, across, like having these distinct areas. And what I tried really hard last fall was to just weave it all together as though it's normal, as though it's natural, because in reality it's not. And I wanted it to be for students, like, of course you have this perspective and this perspective side by side. Does that make sense? So when Nancy Ayers created this rubric, she created a course that went along with it. And it's 4 weeks and it's like 14 hours to go through in a group our work. And so we don't have that kind of time, although I would love it if we did. I know everybody's busy, and my dream would be that we actually got to sit together and go over our rubrics. I mean, our syllabi together, but we don't. However, as Sarah had said, if folks do want to do that, that's personally something I would love to do. And if we wanted to have we could put together a learning community and you could get some funding and a little bit of food or whatever that would make it joyful for you. That's one thing that I guess I'm going to put out there as an offering. If folks want to do that, it would be part of my responsibility as a co-director. I would love to do it. It would be a really great thing for me. And so
we talked about doing it over the summer.
Yeah, we talked about doing it over the summer, but if folks want to do a little something, maybe not that intense, but maybe a gentle version during the semester, I'd also like to do that. Awesome, excited. Joanna, does that help? Do those things help?
Yeah, I think so. And I will say, to the point that Marilyn raised about sort of, you know, the process of improving our syllabi in a sense, and doing this better. I do feel like over the years I've taught versions of this class in particular, I've really been able to evolve the content. Like I remember the first time I taught a version of it, I looked at it after I had sort of put the syllabus together and all the things I thought I needed to teach or that people had told me I needed to include. And I think it was almost all white male authors. And I was horrified by that, but also I felt, okay, this is the canon, this is what I need to include. And I've been teaching it for years, and I've been able to bring in, you know, more and more sort of shift that content and challenge that content and find readings that worked in different ways. One of the ones I just added last semester that worked great was an Indigenous perspective that can sort of, you know, challenge and speak to and relate in really interesting ways to the sort of white ecological science section. So, you know, bringing it in, but it's very much been a process of evolution over years of sort of really thinking through it. And I would say if you teach one of those types of classes and you have colleagues who share the same values, you know, really openly, you know, communicating about, okay, here's things that have worked for me. One of my colleagues in EA set up a shared box folder where we could all put in the readings we used for different topics. And that's been great for, you know, checking out what other people are doing, getting ideas. So I think it's very much a process to challenge some of these like existing canon, but you can do it. It just may take a little while because we only have so much time. And I think to totally rework the canon is awfully difficult, but the more you teach it, the more you can.
Yeah, and it takes nerves, right? Yes. Yeah, time and nerves and support from people who are like-minded, right? Who are on the journey with us. Jessica, did you want to say something?
Yeah, one thing I heard too is like there's this idea of the class that we should be teaching. like the class that we're supposed to be teaching versus the class that we want to be teaching, or the teaching in the way that we want to be teaching it. And that was something I heard from a few people, like that like contrast and that like that feeling of constraint. And that resonated with me because that's something that I've also been working through, is like what's the class that I want to take? What's the class that that versus like what's the class I think that a serious professor, should teach in sociology or should cover. And so that was something that resonated with me, is like trying to free ourselves and to be more free in thinking about what's the class you want to create, but that may be different or complements the canon or canons in different disciplines.
Great.
Sarah.
Oh,
I just wanted to add, your students, especially your intro students, intro classes have come up. They don't really know what to expect. So you have freedom from your students in terms of what readings are normal or what the canon is. The whole point is that they don't know the canon yet. You're going to give it to them or help them discover it or create it. But you are also probably right that your department or your field or your colleagues have expectations. So getting a sense, if you're junior faculty, especially about what those are, gives you a lot more freedom to be like, I have freedom here now, and I can create freedom with the rest of my colleagues in my future iterations of this class. But don't feel too much pressure from what your students expect. You create the class each semester, and so you have some freedom there, I think, more than we sometimes give ourselves.
great point.
And
Joanne?
I would just add to that, that I feel like a lot of the places where I've moved away from the canon are also the places that work best to challenge the received assumptions the students come in with, and that take the class beyond what, say, a student who had a good AP high school class covered. So I think it's had also a tremendous amount of value in terms of making the students think more, and getting away from a lot of the received narratives and the sort of received information that is what they assume they should learn or have learned in the past. So it's also really, I think, strengthened the content of my class a lot with the changes that I've made.
All great points. They remind me of a little story. So I teach a class called organizational theory every fall. And one of my students said, oh, my sister's boyfriend's taking organizational theory at Duke. And I said, can you show me the syllabus? And she said, it's nothing like your syllabus. And she said, oh, it's very business-like, and it's very serious, and like, to be a good leader, do these 5 things. And my class isn't like that at all. And I said, well, isn't that the wonderful thing, is that we get to make these choices and that there's pluralism. I said, to be gentle, I was like, there's pluralism, there's various ways to do it. And as long as you know why, I articulate to the students why I chose this way versus some other way. That's true to myself. And that also is embedded in the educational objectives. I want them to question, what is good leadership, right? What is a healthy organization? Who's responsible for it? So my values are aligned then with the course objectives. Yeah. Marilyn?
I do want to say that I always enjoy the CTL seminars, workshops, and in some institutions, it's you come back and you've got all these ideas and you want to implement them, or you have different ways of understanding a specific topic, and you want to integrate it into your syllabus. And as we're talking about canon, it's yes, some of us have very specific ways of seeing it, but sometimes our institutions, our departments, or field groups are there's a lot of pressure to conform and change, or I think several people have mentioned to say that some of the things that we want to teach aren't as serious or rigorous, or not really organizational studies, not really sociology, not really EA. And so I think it's also really important that we have colleagues like you all who are supportive and are willing to, say, yes, there are different ways of looking at it. And there are different ways in which you can integrate some of these into our syllabi and our curriculum, but also how important it is to have, it's really important we have a session like this, right? Where there's affirmation for you, that that it's okay to have an anti-racist curriculum, that it's okay to have an anti-racist, explicitly so. So, I always before would put all these readings in after my syllabus was reviewed by the department. Right? Or I do have the canon on, but then when we are doing in classroom discussion, the discussion is how you challenge some of these things that are quote unquote canon. And so, I just want to say that it's important, right, to have this in an institution presented at the 5 Cs, that we can do this, but also there are field groups and departments where it's not okay, and some of us have to be a bit cagey with our work, and I hate that that's the case. But anyway, thank you for putting this on, CTL.
Hey, thanks for saying that. That means a lot to me. We're trying to be realistic about where we're all working.
Yeah, and there are larger, we talk about this at the CTL, that there are larger conversations that need to be had, right, at the department level, at the institutional level, and who's like, where do those come from? Where's the impetus for that come from? So as the CTL, we work in the areas of support and community and communion with you all, like-minded people to come together and to support, and to know, like Marilyn, exactly like you said, we're not alone, that other people are thinking about this and struggling with this, and we can help each other. But there's always a structural element, right? There's always an institutional element, and that part is, of course, harder to.
I will say the CTL has a rubric. There's like a rubric for CTLs. And one of the places we're trying to develop is getting more into those institutional committee type rooms where they set curricula policy and stuff like that. So that's like the growing edge of the CTL, and we'll always be working to continue to support you on an individual level, but we're also trying to get more leverage in an institutional way.
Yeah, and I'd say also one of the great things about the CTL, as we're an institution across all the Claremont colleges, but we don't belong to any particular Claremont college. So in that sense, if departments did want to have these conversations, or appointment, promotion, tenure committees did want to have these kinds of conversations, we would be honored participants in those conversations. Like, that would be a great thing. So if there are departments who want to have these and have someone who can help frame or think about like your aspirations and how you move towards them, we would love to be part of those as well, which helps with the structural changes, and allyship. Well, that went by fast, y'all. It's 2:25. I was nervous, and it came out so beautiful. I wanted to thank everyone for asking hard questions and acknowledging hard obstacles, and for being present and caring about community. Maybe we could put in the chat real quick at the end, just how you feel, or well wishes for each other in this semester that's proving to be more difficult than we thought it was going to be, and know that we're here for each other, and we all know each other, and we care for each other. So Jessica feels inspired. Yay. Yes, peace. You got this. Energized. Yeah, we got this, and we're not alone. Always here for each other. All right, friends, you know how to reach each other. Yes, be safe. Thank you, everyone. I wish you all much joy. Anytime you feel your joy flagging, reach out. Okay, let's spread more joy. Disruptive joy. Okay, thank you.